everyone. It's so nice to see you guys today. I have a special treat for you. I'll tell you the story behind it in a second. You know the rules, quirky questions only, please. Anything we can find on Google is just boring. Let's not waste our time. But anything interesting that comes up through the call, feel free to ask. If you've got a message for Robert you'd like him to know, no worries. I'm going to be sending the chat to him after the call, and let's get started. So I'll tell you the story about what happened. Johnny Heller reached out to me and said, you have got to interview this guy. And Johnny's never done that before, ever. I was like, okay, we're booked through the year, but he was like, you've got to interview this guy. And I was like, well, I was thinking of opening, a Thursday. Let's. And so I went to this guy's website. And I mean, first of all, awards to the hilt, industry heavyweight and all that. But his samples, and this is from somebody that recently redid my demos. And I think we all chase the holy grail of the perfect demos. And the only word that just comes to mind with your narrating is effortless. It sounds like you can't hear any of the, we're all challenged. We're all trying to get over the bad habits we have, make it sound natural, make it sound effortless. It's one of those things with with a narration like that, it's where I wonder where the line is drawn between just born with this talent. I mean, I know working on your craft, and you have to work on your craft and all that, but some people I do suspect are just literally born with that talent. And I want to find out where it came from so I can also have it. So so tell me, this is Robert Fass, guys, and this is a ride. This is an interesting story. And I want to hear first, I want to dispense with all the other stuff. Tell me about 10-year-old Robert.
10-year-old Robert was living in North Chevy Chase, Maryland. Unfashionable North Chevy Chase.
Wait, Chevy Chase? Was it named after the
Scottish.
actor?
I think he was named after the Scottish battle, but ask your Glaswegian husband.
Okay.
But yeah, it's a Chevy Chase is a moneyed suburb of Washington, D.C., and North Chevy Chase is a little more modest village, still upper middle class, but more standard homes just north of there. And by then I had skipped second grade, so I was a little bit intimidated still by everyone in class being a year older than me, and a little taller than me, etc. And I was probably just beginning to get obsessed with horror and monster makeup.
Oh, wow.
Monster makeup. So I would say that was my earliest entree into the world of acting, was that I was fascinated with Lon Chaney Sr., right? Who was the, man of 1,000 faces, all his monster makeups.
For a 10-year-old, that's kind of...
Well, I discovered Famous Monsters of Filmland, and that was my Bible, I guess, at that time. And so my parents, wisely or not, decided, well, he's playing with makeup, we better put him into an acting class, so they enrolled me in an acting class down in Washington, D.C., a place called the Washington Theater Club. It's been defunct for decades. But that was my first taste of scene study. And literally, I was a kid, but I was doing ennui and, John Van Druten, adult-themed adult plays.
Did you have brothers and sisters, or were you like a precocious only child?
Older brother, older sister, but I was the baby.
Okay.
And that led to another acting class at a community theater near me. And by the time I was 12, I did my first public performance in a musical review at a local Catholic high school. right? And it was all sketch comedy and musical numbers, and I was sort of the mascot because I was 12 at that point, and they were all 17. So it was, I was no doubt pretty terrible, but you know, the bug was in place, and so I just got involved with my community theater, and you know, early teens, I was performing all the time.
But so being young, right? You jumped a year in school, you're younger than everyone in the acting classes. What do you think that did to your personality? Do you think it made you insecure or confident?
Insecure, I think, for
Yeah,
the most part. For the most part, unless I really felt like I was nailing something and I got that feedback.
because I can imagine the feeling of like you have to work harder to get what everyone else has because you're at a disadvantage.
Yeah, there's a lot of judgment, I think, at least perceived judgment. There's support too, don't get me wrong,
Maybe a
uh,
little bit of jealousy that
but
they're,
probably in both directions,
yeah, yeah,
you know.
yeah.
But I just got exposed to really wonderful writers already. You know, I'm just realizing this now, that it was James Thurber, it was Shirley Jackson, you know, doing Thurber Carnival, doing The Lottery, doing The Haunting of Hill House,
Wow.
and Shakespeare, you know, not too long after that. So, you know, I got immersed. My mom was a librarian, which helped. You know, I had an appreciation for spoken word from a very early age. Um, my dad was a volunteer reader for the blind in Washington. So I just think they, you know, it was a house full of books,
Yeah.
and I spent a lot of time at the Library of Congress. It was my favorite place to be.
Yeah. So, and I think a lot of narrators do have that in common, but I think the fact that in a lot of narrators, we spent many, many years holed up in a closet reading while everyone else was doing life, right?
Yeah.
But I think you have the advantage of the acting plus that, you know, the performing plus. And so parents totally supportive, never a whisper of get a job as an accountant.
Amazingly, the closest they would come to that would be wanting me to have something to fall back on. But at no point did they ever think maybe you ought to start thinking about falling back, you know.
Yeah.
So I think I was successful enough, and they were willing to be supportive enough that, you know, I sort of got through that period. So by the time I was in college and I was really emerging as a person, as an actor and a director, at that time I was really moving more into directing. Um, the die was pretty much cast, you know.
So was this an easy path all the way
Hmm.
through?
It's never easy, is it? I mean, because every job is a labor
Yeah.
of love, hopefully.
Yeah, but
But
see, a labor of love. And it was there ever a moment where you weren't in the right place doing the thing you loved and you needed to change direction?
Hollywood.
Oh my gosh, did you
That
do
was
that
later, and that was a
too?
very short period of time. And
I
you
did
know,
that. That kind of destroyed a bit of my soul, Hollywood. It did.
you know, I think you
It gave me an eating disorder personally.
expectations are, sorry, say again.
It gave me an eating disorder personally. It made me feel like the entire world judged you by your looks. And I thought I was above that. I thought I
Right.
was too educated to fall for that. And then I got to Hollywood and I thought, wow, you know, I admired a city full of dreamers. I thought, you know, these are my people. They believe that wishes can come true and they're willing to put themselves on the line and they want it. But then on the other hand, you could walk into a room and if you didn't look like you could give them something, you did not, you were literally not a human being. It's like a
Yeah,
shock.
yeah.
Yeah. So what was your
So
experience in Hollywood?
my experience was that I had been uh, invited out by a producer who said, I can find you work. I know people. That story, you know.
Yeah.
And the timing was right for me to take some time away, and I sublet my apartment for 6 months, and I went out there, and the writers went on strike. So
Oh, how old were you
I
at
was
this
kind of
point?
30.
Okay.
We've jumped a bit. And 29, 30, somewhere in there.
That's a hard
Yeah.
time though, because you feel like everything's on the line.
Yeah, I mean, I had friends out there. I had someone who amazingly is still a friend who said I could stay with him till I found a place, and I sent everything that I loved and wanted with me for 6 months in a trunk by UPS. And I was stopping in Minnesota. There's a whole Minnesota chapter for me. That was college. I'd stopped back up there for a little while, and I'd sent this stuff ahead. And the day before I traveled on to LA, my friend called me and said, everything I have is yours. I said, what's going on? He said, well, UPS came to deliver your trunk, and I just signed the slip telling him to leave it at the door, but I live in a crack house, basically. And someone
Oh
had just
my
made off with all, just
God.
everything that I really, really wanted to have as comfort around me trying. So the upside of it was I was stripped down to the essentials for this
Yeah.
new attempt. And yeah, the writer's strike happened. So, pretty soon after, I mean, I did get a couple of agents in a row who they were not a good, agent. Certainly not for me. I got introduced to some very high up people who said, why are you here? I represent Michael J. Fox. What am I going to do with you, kind of thing. So
That's the feeling.
it was,
And it stuck with me, that people can be like that. Like there is nothing behind the eyes. They're like,
that's
you're
the,
not as important as this person. That is so weird to me,
yeah,
Robert.
it is weird. It is weird.
And
And
but
it's
can
not
I
great
bring
for,
one thing up though?
yeah,
You not getting your things. I was literally listening to a book today that I'm finding fascinating about you remind me, the guy brought up an example of a guy that couldn't stop smoking his whole life. And he wanted to desperately. He showed up at a new job and he goes to the cafeteria and the guy's like, you want a cigarette? And he goes, nope, don't smoke, never did. But because he said that in front of a whole bunch of new colleagues, he had to stick to it because it was his new identity. He'd claimed it and he couldn't admit that it wasn't. So he changed. So you not having your comfort things and bringing your past probably in a way forced you to literally be who you could be in the new, completely new surroundings without anything from the past.
yeah. And I think I struggled to sort of find the way things were done out there.
Yeah.
I had an audition here and there. This was eye-opening and goes right to what we're talking about. I had a friend who was working on a series, on a comedy show. And he set me up to meet with the casting director. I met with the casting director. I had all these New York stage credits and a couple of other little things. And there was a wall of filing cabinets, all headshots, all pictures and resumes. And I mean, I don't know how far back they went, but I said, I'll show you where I'm putting this. And they opened a drawer and it said, a little folder. This is the friends folder. And they put me in this slim little VIP. That was the implication, was like I was now, had nothing to do with my ability whatsoever. And I think that was the first direct awareness that I had that it doesn't matter what you do, what you've done, what your abilities are. Like as you said, is the look right? And look, I have a lot of good friends in Hollywood. They've done well there. They love it there. I made some lifelong friends there during this time. So this is, your mileage may vary,
Yeah.
And I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready to play that game. I didn't have, that's where maybe the insecurity of the 10-year-old
Yeah.
came into play, because I know people, I had classmates who would just walk in and own the room, lie, and say whatever they needed to say to get the job, be great, you know, and that's how some folks play it.
But different times, I think we all have like, it's interesting to hear that though, because see how you got into theater, you followed this, you followed that, you fit, but I think I pity the people that don't put themselves in a position to explore the places they don't fit in. Do you know what I mean? Because we're kind of rubbing up against the bits of our personality we're uncomfortable with. So someday we can look back at it and go, oh, I could, you know what I mean? But some people never test that. And I'd rather be a person that has put myself in many places.
Right? Right.
No.
You know,
Yeah.
if you're not open and vulnerable, then, you know, you may do great, but that's not how I go about things.
Yeah. And my challenge has been not living in regret for not having done things differently, because you got to change the story, right? Change so you can move on. So when did you decide to leave Hollywood? How did that come about?
I actually, I extended my stay by 6 months or nearly. And to be honest, I don't remember what the reason was, if the writers were coming off strike. I'd found my way. I had gotten to know, it was now a very dear friend, Jason Culp, who's a terrific narrator, accomplished superstar veteran narrator. And he was one of the people who was the first narrators that I knew and would talk to me about the craft. But he and I wound up in a legendarily horrendous Shakespeare production during the writer's strike. That was just so, it's just, I could go on for the whole hour about it, but it's where he and I met, and his brother Joseph Culp also joined the cast, and then he brought me into an acting class with Kenneth McMillan. If you remember Ken McMillan, the actor who starred in Ragtime as the fireman, and Dune. He was Baron Harkonnen in the David Lynch Dune. Sweetest man, and he had like a theater camp. It was nearly like a theater camp. It was a scene study class, but every so often, if he saw a scene that he thought this is really worth digging into, he would stop class and he would direct a production of that play so the actors could fill it out completely. And it was just a really tight, warm, wonderful, supportive atmosphere, and that, I think, kept me around for a little while too, because it was just, I'd finally found this, this little community.
Yeah.
But then I needed to get back to my apartment in New York that I didn't want to lose, and I had a dirt cheap little 1-bedroom on the Upper West Side in Manhattan, and
Yeah, you definitely don't want to lose
didn't
that.
want to let go of that. And the thing is, for that same money that I was paying for a shoebox on a Shaftway,
Yeah.
in LA, I had a 5-room, all
Yeah.
windows apartment and a driveway, my own parking space looking out over fruit trees and a reservoir.
But New York is New York. You didn't have New York.
But I came back and I asked the landlord, got anything else? And he eventually gave me a 1-bedroom, and it was less money, which is strange.
Wow.
I never knew why, but anyway, so I was there for 20 more years. And that's when I got back into improvisation, which was, I thought that was going to be my niche. That's where I felt completely at home.
Yeah.
That was, yeah, improv and I go way back, and I'm really good at it. It's the thing that I thought, this is what I should be doing. At the time, I'd been to see Monteith and Rand. It was I heard the Mike Nichols and Lane May records, of course, as a kid. I was crazy about spoken word recordings growing up. But when I saw Monteith and Rand, I was like, oh, this is cool. I think I could do this. And John Monteith came to teach at HB Studio, where I was studying with Uta Hagen and Herbert Berghoff.
Wait a minute. What did you just say? Where you were studying with Uta Hagen?
Yeah, I was 7 years with Uta.
Oh my gosh, talk about hiding the lead. Wow.
Yeah.
What was that like?
It was hard work. She's no slouch. I started with Herbert, and Herbert's the one who, when I came to New York the first time, and I signed up for his class and I interviewed with him, and he was looking at my resume and he saw my college experience. He was like, this, I have to unlearn you, this college acting. So I went from this completely external monster makeup approach to the scholarly over-intellectualizing college days and being a director, to just getting internal, finding the emotional core of a character, the given circumstances of a character and behaviors within those circumstances. And then, to whatever extent necessary, synthesizing those things,
So I'm starstruck now. That's like, wow. I've got her whole, I've got the course and everything, but like in real life, that must have been quite something. How do you think now I'm seeing why your samples are so perfect? So how did you, wow, how do you think it changed your acting? Uta in particular. I'm a big fan, can you tell?
Completely. I think when you finally get it, and it takes a long time, she has her exercises, solo exercises, when you bring those in between your scenes, you start to get it. You start to forget everything out, but your reality, and you really get to the point of belief. And if there's anything that's core to what we do and the essential nature of that in acting, it sounds so obvious when I'm saying it, but it's what we have to bring to the work. And I'm kind of skipping over the improv part of it, which I'd like to get back to because I think it's also very germane, at least in my story. But I remember being in a scene from The Cherry Orchard, and I, Buddhist classes and HB scene study in general, you'd get on the subway and you'd see somebody with 3 shopping bags full of clothes and props, and you knew they were on their way to, to the scene study class. And they would be walking up the block with all their stuff. But we're doing a scene, and having a picnic on a hilltop. And at a certain point, I looked out and I saw the town. I didn't see the classroom anymore. I saw this green hill and the grass flowing down as far as I could see. And I was just, not hallucinating. It's just like the belief kicked in and everything happened. Everything that was in the words, that was in the behavior that we'd been rehearsing, just, we crossed a line into something really rare and wonderful. And I thought, and the feedback after the class, she, the first thing out of her mouth was always, "What can you tell me?" When you'd finish a scene in Uda's class, she'd say, "What can you tell me?" And you learned how to answer that over time as well, about what your experience was and what you thought worked and where you might have felt you got in trouble, or your connection with your partner got lost in some way, or whatever it was. But I remember that as one of a few turning points in my work in the classroom that taught me about, that taught me about what good acting can be.
Because that's that moment, isn't it? In every book we do, that's the moment we want to get to. That's what Johnny Heller's always saying. If you can't meet that moment, leave the booth. You can't, but then you have to marry it with the reality of the deadline. And and it sounds wonderful, but my challenge is, yes, when you have a problem with focus and life intervenes and you're all over the place, and you leave the booth, you rearrange your schedule, you go back in the booth when it works out. But what about when you have a week when your brain is all over the place? You know what I mean? That managing the ego, the emotions, the who you are, to get the hell out of the way of who you need to be in the booth is such a challenge. And I hear most narrators, a lot of narrators, you can hear them lose it. You can hear the book and you can hear the moment when they've lost it. And you live in fear of not meeting that moment, like
Don't do
Johnny
that.
Heller so often does, like I heard in your samples. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, don't live in fear, first of all.
Yeah, probably
Life's
gets
too
in the
short.
way.
But yeah, I mean, look, it's a business, it's a craft, and it's a business. And so if you have a deadline of a week and you've got a 12, 14-hour book, you're not going to have a lot of time to walk away. But maybe walking away for 5 minutes is all you need.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. So tell me about
So,
improvisation. You said that informed it the most.
well, it was a major ingredient. Whether it informed it the most, I don't know. But I started doing improv in a pretty significant way. I'd been in a couple of sketch comedy troupes in Washington and got involved doing improv in New York.
What do you like about it? I'm genuinely curious.
It suits my brain. I like the collaboration of it, that it's group, that you're building this thing together. I like that it allowed me to draw on all of my education and my interests, and just to create stuff out of thin air. And I had a knack for being funny in those situations, whether it was not jokes necessarily, because I think that can destroy the work, but situational humor, and character humor. And just a quick sidebar, I was invited to Second City to audition in Chicago for Second City, and when I got there, everybody was me, jokes per minute, and that was so the opposite of what I'd been taught and what my ethic was, which was, it's you and me, let's make this thing. If you read Jeff Sweet's book, Something Wonderful Right Away, which is an early oral history of Second City, the ethic of those actors and those improvisers, and what it took to build a scene is, there's something sacred in that.
Because improv is receiving and taking. You can't do improv if you're not receiving as well. It can't be me, can it? I mean,
Right.
how do you do improv?
Well, it can for the three minutes that you're up on stage with an audition with 5 strangers.
Yeah, but that's sad because that doesn't say.
Yeah. No, my ethic about improvisation, and this is what I would teach students when I was teaching improv, is you come with a gift in one hand and the other hand open.
Yes.
And you're always ready to let go of your great idea.
Yeah.
Right? Because that moment may have passed a while ago, and if you're still thinking about that instead of what's going on in this present moment, you've lost it.
I had a director, I got taken on, and my ego is the only reason I said yes. I got taken on for a lead, and it was a great role. It was like a politically contemporary Wee Macbeth, right? But I only had 2 weeks to memorize a scary amount, and he made me get up and do it without knowing the script. I was like, I'm not off script. I just got this yesterday. I'm not off script. I can't. He made me act the argument or whatever, act the feelings in the argument, but everyone else knew their lines. So I was, but the thing is, it was the first time I'd ever experienced it. I was basically having to do a kind of improv because I didn't know my lines.
Yeah.
but I learned them. I absorbed them somehow on time for the play. I don't know how it happened to this day. I mean, I did fracture my shoulder and tear my wrist off the next day and have to still go on because I promised. But but I think pushing me into the situation, as terrifying as it was, of having to let go of the crutch of the lines, which sounds a bit silly. I know
Yeah.
it's not improv, but that's how
Well,
I
but it
feel.
forced you into the emotional content of the
Yeah,
scene before you had the words for it, and then that leads to the behaviors, and that's why you were able to, I presume, learn the lines so readily, because you already had it in your muscles and your bones and in your heart what the track of the scene was, and the
yeah.
words hopefully are going to fit that.
It was a big lesson. It was the first time I realized how much who I think I am comes with me on stage.
Mm.
Even if you think you're 100% into the part, who I think I am. I don't want to make a fool of myself. I don't want to embarrass myself. I'm the good girl that knows all the lines first. I know everything I'm doing. I'm perfect at what I do. I work hard. All that crap, I couldn't afford it. And it was easier. It was, and that's how I think. I know that it sounds like I'm going off field, but when I think of improv, the thing that kind of scares me about improv, the few times I've done it and kind of always makes me uncomfortable, is the fact that you don't have, to me, it doesn't feel like I have protection of the structure. So I have to just be me and trust. And that freaks me the hell out.
But that's exactly it, because who else are you going to be but you? You
Yeah,
know, um, that's just the nature of it, and it takes a long time to learn that.
it's
You know,
hard.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really hard, which comes to narrating. Where did you meet your wife? England or here?
This is the great story. Um, I met my wife when I was in Vienna, Austria for one night.
Oh, wow.
I was, I, I'm going to jump to the end of my improv career. It
Okay.
was a crash and burn.
Okay.
And
Oh,
after 10 years, I had nothing left to show for that work because everything was ephemeral and it just vanished into the air and into the minds of the people who were on stage or in the audience that any
yeah.
given night. So I started taking writing workshops and photography. Uh, and I created a documentary photo essay, starting with my parents just before my father died in '97. Uh, and it grew into a project photographing and interviewing long married couples all across America
Oh,
who were legally
like when
married.
Harry met Sally, like when they're on the
Yeah, I hate that.
couch.
But yeah, I got a lot of that. Um, there were black and white portraits and interviews they were legally married and minimum of 40 years. Those were the only two criteria at the time. But I got as wide, as diverse a spectrum of couples as I could. I wound up with 37 couples, and happy, unhappy, mixed orientation, where the husband had come out 30 years into the marriage, or the wife found out after 30 years that
Wow.
her husband had been cheating on her with men in casual encounters, and um, different religions, different, rural, urban, you name it. So at a certain point, I was invited to be part of a group exhibition in Salzburg, Austria. A friend of mine was curating. And he said, "Do you want to take a month and we'll just drive around? I want to visit some friends in Slovenia and we want to go to Croatia." And I said, "Absolutely." So we arrive in Salzburg and well, we're going to be here, have this big show up. Why don't we try and get something in Vienna as well? And they called I may have this a little bit wrong, but ultimately we got a show, three of us, to come and give a slide lecture in Vienna. The US Embassy had this cultural institute. So I get there. We're told everything has to change. We have to truncate from 45 minutes down to 20 minutes for each of our three presentations. And I'll skip my wife's side because there's like 100 reasons why she might have taken this door instead of that door throughout the whole evening. But at the end of the thing, I went 45 minutes late because it was going really well, and I'm doing this entertaining lecture about each couple, talking about them, imitating them, whatever. And it ends, and I'm
You can take the actor out of acting, but you can't take the acting out of the actor.
completely. And I see this beautiful woman, literally eyes meet across a crowded room. It was that cliche and wonderful. And this couple corrals me to talk about their marriage, and they just want to talk about their sex life. And they're just sort of odd. I didn't know the Austrian culture. Now I got married there. The kids are, her kids from her first marriage are still over there. And so we've gone a lot, and I have good friends there now. But at the time, I was just like, what is happening? And meanwhile, I see this woman catching each other's eye. Some guy's hitting on her, and she's finishing her glass of wine. And we just try and make our way to each other over the next 10 minutes.
Oh, how
And
romantic.
we connected. And yeah, I mean, we met, we traded information. I had a cell phone that I had borrowed that wasn't working 90% of the time, but it worked the one time that I called her. And I went on the next day to Slovenia, Croatia, and all that. But we were emailing, and she said, well, how about I meet you in Salzburg on the way back? I did that. A few months later, she came to New York. I came back. My show started getting exhibited around Germany through the US Embassy. There's a circuit of these institutes. So I was getting flown over about once every month or 6 weeks.
I'm going to stop you again. Sorry to keep doing this, but I want to. So while you're doing all this with the show, how were you feeling about being an actor? Were you thinking, I'm just on hiatus, I'm going to go back to this, I'm done with this?
At that point, I was starting to work I was getting commercials, on camera work in commercials.
Okay.
I was doing a lot of industrials, and I was also starting to work as a corporate creative director, writing scripts, producing videos, coaching, presentations, speaker coaching, things like that. So I was keeping busy, and it paid a lot better than theater.
Okay.
But I was definitely keeping my hand in, and no question about it. And doing plays. Did an off-Broadway play in God, it was 2000. I don't know, like every little. I had so many irons in the fire.
Yeah.
In Daniela, I had a novel I was working on. I published a children's audio drama that won first place at the Midwest Radio Theater Workshop, which is now the Here Now Festival.
So do you just pursue every idea you have? Or do you have no moments of self-doubt before doing them? Or do you just do it?
I just do it. Of course I have self-doubt.
Wow. Why do you think that is? What do you think it is about you that enables you? Have you always been that way, or did you ever have to learn how to be that way? Why do you think that is? Because you do know that most people in the world don't do that. Although we want to.
I think college is when that happened for me.
Yeah.
Because I transferred into a 4-year school after having 3 years of a kind of mediocre, that's unfair, but kind of mediocre junior college education. So when I got to McAllister in St. Paul, I came in as a second semester sophomore, but I'd already taken a lot of the classes that juniors and seniors took. So I was able to go beyond the regular curriculum, do a lot of independent study, create some honors work for myself. I became a total Samuel Beckett fiend. And
so for the first time of your life, you had caught up to the grade that you would have normally have been in.
Exactly.
But you had the extra experience and the boring stuff out of the way.
Yeah. And so when the time came that I had directed a short a portion of Bernarda Alba, the House of Bernarda Alba, in the Black Box Theater, and then I wanted for my senior year to do 3 Beckett plays as my final honors work, and the head of the department said students can't handle the space. and I just said, let's see what the see what the administration of the college has to say about that, you know.
Wow.
And I brought the the dean of students in, and another professor who said he would be my sponsor, and he's like, oh, I have no objection. Like he, he's totally walked
Yeah.
it back. And so I had free reign, and it was just a glorious lesson on, if you don't ask, you don't get. And
But
that's
what I
been
love about this
great.
conversation and what I love about talking to you is the way you approach work, and you're thoughtful and considered, and you think about the things you like, and you take on projects that interest you. And I think a lot of narrators do that by nature. I mean, we weren't born narrators. A lot of narrators were actors that done 100 other things, had different careers. But I think with all the talk right now about scarcity and the market being flooded, and dread I say the words AI, I don't even want to have that conversation, but all that coming up, there is a lot of feeling of, oh my God, if they take my job away from me, what can I do? And that's why would you choose to live in that world when you could live in a world like Robert lives in, whereas just what next thing interests me? I'll pick up this hat over here and do this. Well, do you know what I mean? Because we all have, by nature of what we do, don't we all have that in us? And that's how people should be thinking, rather than,
Yeah,
I'm not going to be able to pay my insurance.
right. And
That's,
and that's not to say I don't share all of that
yeah.
doubt and that concern,
But that's the
and
thing. We all share it, but it's how you deal with it. And you seem to
sure,
confront it head on.
maybe not. I don't know if my wife would agree with you, but I certainly, you have resources, you have abilities, and hopefully you have relationships, because so much of what we
Yeah.
do is relationship based. Um, so yeah, so where
I
are we now?
like that. I'm going to channel your mindset the next time I think something is terribly important, because a lot of the things we think are terribly important aren't. We could just get busy doing the next thing.
I have I have many mantras, but one of them, my creative partner director in the improv world said, is take the desperation out of it.
Right.
And it was
Oh, I love that.
so illuminating, because
I
I
love
didn't see
that.
it. I didn't see it, but it was absolutely there. You talk
I'm
about the,
I'm using that for
staying
the
with,
tagline of this call. I'm not even waiting for final last words. That's perfect. I love that. Take the desperation out of it.
yeah, because something else is going to take its place. What's the worst thing that's going to happen? If you embarrass yourself, is that the
Yeah.
first time or the last time? No, you know. And I just, it's so freeing, And what you were talking about earlier, you, we're all still saying yes to just about every job we're offered, regardless of how discerning we want to be. You
Yeah.
know, it's rare that I'll turn down, or that I have turned down work, unless it's just so politically against my, my thinking, or if the writing is just horrible.
Yeah.
The two things that I won't do.
Tell me
Not
about
that
the
I
first
haven't.
book.
I have.
Tell me
Say
about
again?
the first book you ever got. How did it feel? Do you remember? Do two things. The first book you ever got, and the
Yeah.
first book you loved that you got. You know, that book where you're like,
I'm
wow, I
funny
can't
that
believe
way.
I'm
I mean, I
doing.
could take that question two ways. I'll start with the first book, which was a long, short story. I had, let me preface it, if I may. When I decided to do this, I had been reading to the blind on something called the In Touch Network in New York. Folks may know it. It was an amazing organization based out of the Jewish Guild for the Blind, just down the road from Lincoln Center. And when my dad died, he had been 25 years reading to the blind, and in his honor, I walked in there.
Oh,
And they said, can you read with someone, because they read in pairs, right? And the person who co-read The New Yorker was out sick. And so they sat me down with a wonderful reader, Morton Banks, and I was in the chair next to him for 11 years, once a week, reading cold, the best writing in America, you know,
I
from
love
fiction
that.
to essays to politics to poetry to cartoon captions, you know. And so the training ground for that was incredible. That's where I cut
Yeah.
my teeth.
Yeah.
And then there was a fellow volunteer, Catherine Puma, who's a wonderful actress and is involved with Hudson Valley Shakespeare here. And she was a member of the acting company, and which is the sort of the national, as close as America's come to a national theater. And she had been invited to an APA seminar, a live talk, because they were looking to bring more trained actors into the fold. This is probably 2004, somewhere in there, 2003,
Okay.
2004. And she wasn't interested, and she knew I would be, so she offered me her invitation. And I went in, and I loved everything about it. And you know, there were some veteran narrators there, you know, established narrators talking. There were some producers talking, and Max Bloomquist, who was at Brilliance at the time, everyone got the name of someone on the back of their card. And if you wanted, you could send a script, a recording of a short sample to that person, and they would give you feedback. So he gave me enough encouragement. He said, "You don't have the most resonant voice, but you could find some work, you know." So I went
You
into
must have
overdrive.
changed a lot since doing your
Uh,
samples, because that's
Probably.
like some voice.
Well, you're kind. I think, what do I want to say? I got extremely methodical. There was a directory, an APA directory, had a list of every producer and publisher in the industry.
Yeah, there still is.
I made the most outrageous demo CD, of course, at the time. Everything that I thought I could do, which was everything. So I had poetry on there. I had like a 10-minute sample of a Stanley Elkin novel that I loved. I had Shakespeare. I had, you know, nonfiction. I had character stuff. I had kids. And I sent it to every single person in that directory with a return postcard, stamped self-addressed postcard saying, "Don't ever contact me again," or maybe, or yes. 2 out of the 40 or 50 or however many they were got in touch. One of whom was Laura Wilson, who was at Audio Renaissance, which is now Macmillan, basically. And she hired me to do this Jeffrey Deaver story. It was part of a longer series of crime.
I love Jeffrey Deaver.
So that was my entree, was doing this, you know, this mystery police procedural about a police statistician, you
Yep.
know. And that was my first. And she said, "Call me every week," which
Wow.
will never happen again for any of us. But then it was the book that changed, that really, and it was the very next book. I had auditioned for Sue Makowicz at Gizmo, the beloved studio Gizmo that was doing a lot of stuff for film and TV, but also working with, as far as for me, was BBC audiobooks. And they said there's a new series coming out. It's like the next Harry Potter. It's going to be the next Harry Potter. So they had me come in and recorded me for a half hour doing different voices and all this stuff. I didn't get it. It wasn't the next Harry Potter. And unbeknownst to me, she had been circulating that audition sample for other projects.
Wow.
And close to 2 years later, I want to say, she called and said, "Ray Bradbury has chosen you to narrate his new novel that he's been working on for 30 years. It's the sequel to Dandelion Wine." And I was just like,
How did that moment
What?
feel? How did that
It
moment
felt
feel?
amazing because
Amazing.
she told me that some big stars had been up for it as well. So the ego stroking was nice there too. But it was just
And
like,
right there is the payoff from all those years of improv where you said, well, there's nothing to show for it. Right there is what you had to show for it. It
right?
that made you who you were to book the Ray Bradbury. You wouldn't have been, do you think you would have booked that book or been where you are and who you are if you hadn't done all those years of improv?
Of course not.
Yeah.
No. And the
That
other component
investment
for,
in your talent,
yeah.
that's what it is.
And the other component for me is directing. The years that I
Yeah.
spent directing, because we self-direct in the booth. Even,
Yeah.
I mean, in the
And
earliest days, sure, there was an engineer slash director, and sometimes we still have that luxury, but with all the home recording we do on our own, having that, I think I'm known as someone who self-directs really well, you know.
but as an actor also, not just self-directing,
Oh
as an
no, you've got to have the
actor,
multiple heads, and that's the improviser.
but
Because
you
as an
think that
improviser,
directing changes your acting as well? Because I've always heard that coaching brings you to mastery with whatever you're doing because you see it from the teacher's perspective and you hear it from the people learning, and so then you become more well balanced in your craft.
yeah,
Is that right?
it's a version of that. You know, for me, you have to have three heads going on
Yeah.
at the same time, which is you yourself, you know, taking on the words, taking on the spirit, the truth of the material. You've got the character you're playing, who is emotionally operating on whatever the text is feeding them, and then you've got this third mind, which is paying attention to how this all is fitting together, the changing points of view, the camera angles, if you would, if you're, you know, visualizing. Um, so I think having the directorial experience, it probably works against me somewhere in there as well, but for the most part, I think it's really something that has helped me maintain a pace, helped me to, you know, make those shifts in POV. And to me, the proof in that pudding was the first audio award that I won for history, was a book that Audible hired me to do. It was part of the Oxford series, Oxford History of the United States series, right? And it was 30 some hours. And I had to find a studio. And I had a relationship with a friend who ran the studio at an ad agency in Midtown. And he gave me an engineer and space to go in and record. We recorded in a cavernous room with all the air conditioning units. It was not a studio. It wasn't insulated. It wasn't
Wow.
acoustically treated, right?
Yeah.
The engineer had never done an audiobook before. He'd done commercials. I had a weird infection on my tongue that
Oh,
was traveling around. So my mouth just felt, I sounded okay, but my mouth just felt so off, and I was so
odd.
self-conscious about everything. And we would just meet in the evenings for like 4 hours. I would, you talk about sounding effortless. I can't tell you the amount of effort that went into just getting through a page of this book. Partly because of the material, it was filled with phrases in quotation marks, filling long sentences, half-page long sentences, unattributed for the most part. Just, you just had to indicate vocally that this was, you know, for
Oh,
30
fun.
hours. Um, and it was just me and this newbie, you know, I mean, it wasn't a newbie as an engineer in general, but doing this work, and won the Audie for best history. So go figure, you know. But certainly that experience and those skills and that attitude were key to making that happen.
So do you still, because you've been doing this a long time now, narrating, do you find that the experience has changed your relationship to the job? Joy,
Yes. Yeah, I
upsetness,
mean,
lack of confidence?
I think when, what was it, about 2011, 2010, 2011, when the home studio wave began, that's when we moved out of my little one bedroom, because by then my wife had moved to the US and was living here, and 3 years in that one bedroom was great for a man cave, not great for
Yeah. We did that when
uh,
guests came over. We had to like knock on their door to get to the bathroom.
that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
That was our layout, and you had to go into the kitchen sideways.
Yeah.
So I, we bought a 3-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, in the Northwest Bronx, and I was able to put that big ass thing in there, which is an NPR booth. I will tell you,
Oh, very cool.
it had been an NPR booth, so it's got great vibes, and has little decorative glass sconces inside.
Oh, they're very cool.
But I bring it up because that is when I got a booth, and it was right when publishers were asking, do you have a home studio? And finally I was able to say yes. And then I just started getting books handed to me that I was on my own with, and it went from, I went from being in a closet with blankets hanging and all my clothes around me, which sounds great, and using Tantor's original Game Boy controller software to advance the text, and
Oh,
to actually having
no.
Pro Tools, learning Pro Tools, and just getting into making it into more of a business,
Yeah.
and I've been really lucky. I have just, I thank my lucky stars. The books that I get have been good to great, almost without exception. And to answer a different way what you asked earlier, to me, every book that I get is the best book ever written, as for the time that I'm recording it, right?
Yeah.
During the time that that's on my plate, it's just the best, because that raises the bar for me to meet in the performance, to do the work justice.
Yeah.
What I might say about it 6 months later is a different story, perhaps, but not all that different. I think that I have been lucky. I get books that I'm known as someone who can handle elegant material, complicated material, find the arc in stuff that doesn't seem to have one, and so I think I'm rewarded by the publishers with stuff that I continue to think is interesting, even if I may be kicking and screaming at the difficulty level of it.
I'm that way with some nonfiction. I have to say, I get assigned to nonfiction, and I was in danger of maybe not being as gracious, which is ridiculous, because the thing about it is I've never had a nonfiction, because some of them were like heavy business books, like dense, and I
Yeah.
hate the corporate world. I'm like, yes, I'd love it. And then, but it's like going out on a date with that person and they say all the wrong things. You're like, oh, this is a non-starter. This is ridiculous. Halfway through the date, but you feel guilty. So you go on the second date. I would do the book and end up learning some amazing thing. Every single one of them, I'd learn some amazing thing halfway through, and so months later, I would never regret it. Months later, I'd be like, oh yeah, I can't think of one book that I'm not like, have really fond memories of that date that went horribly wrong in the beginning.
Yeah. So there's a reason you said yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, I
You
said
say
yes
yes,
because
you
I'm
gotta go.
greedy. I say yes, I'm greedy, but I do think I'm good at falling in love with it. It's a job given to me and I appreciate it.
Yeah.
You know how some people are like, they put down their spouse or their kids, but they love like strange. I've never been that person. To me, I appreciate where I live. I appreciate my family. I love the book I'm doing. If I'm not going to love it, don't do it.
Yeah.
You know.
And I had a movement teacher back in acting school days who, the thing he would say most when you were up there doing something was, make it important. And again, one of those things that just sticks in your head. If it's not important to you, who's going to care if you don't care? The listener's going to know that. They're going to feel it. They're going to sense it. And they'll go on to the next book by someone else.
I love that. Okay. So now I already know what I'm using for the tagline, but I'm still going to make you answer this final question that I make everyone answer.
Look at the time. I had no idea.
I know. Famous last words. If you would say one thing that you would want somebody to take away from this call that are watching this video in 60, 70 something years, what would you like them to leave if it was just one thing that you'd like to let people know? Even if it's a funny joke, words of advice, a joke, anything.
Oh God, I'm terrible at jokes on demand. So, I guess, use what you've got. Whatever it is you've accumulated in your life, it's so much, and that's where your fuel comes from. That's where your approach to the text is going to come. So use what you've got. I'd say, gratitude is a big part of my approach to things and my place in this community. I'm really grateful for the relationships, for the opportunities, the list of people who've done me solid in some way or other, that's helped me on my journey here, is just, is a long one. And I try and do that as well.
Do you coach? Do you coach other narrators one-on-one?
I have done very little, but it's something that I will hope to do more of. I do coaching in another universe, not related to audiobooks, like sort of an outgrowth of my speaker coaching, back when I was doing that kind of work, presentation coaching, that sort of thing. I used to teach ear prompter and teleprompter and stuff for commercials. So, I mean, I have, and I taught improv for a long time. So I certainly have the skill set, but it's something that I need to direct more towards this community. So,
well, we will add
yes.
your contact link to the About page. So if people watching this video are interested and it is a direction you're going in,
Absolutely.
We'll add it to the About page and everything. Thank you so much, Robert. This was the call we needed tonight. I can see the happy smiling faces in the audience. This was the call we needed. And I'm very, very grateful that you took the time. And I mean, seriously, can Johnny call them? What a guest. So
Johnny's okay. He's a dear friend.
I might be stalking you to ask you to come back again sometime.
I would love it.
So, thank you so much for your time. Thank you guys for joining. Mwah! See you later. Video in 2 weeks, everyone. If you want Robert's contact details, they will be in the About page. Bye.
You're welcome.
Bye. Thanks for joining, Robert. Bye.